Well, welcome back to another episode of the Your Next Chapter podcast. One of the gorgeous things about being in the online space is the people that you get to meet over the years. And I feel really, really blessed to have met Rachel Lancaster, who is our visitor and our guest today on the podcast. She's all the way over in London, one of my favorite places in the entire world. And it's my evening and her morning. And we've agreed to have this wholehearted conversation. And I can't wait for us to go into all the different areas that I know we have in common and to explore and discuss. So thank you so much, Rachel. It's great to have you here.
Hi, Angela. It's lovely to be here.
Well, my feeling when we first met under this guise of the magnificent midlife, which we're going to backtrack a little bit and understand how you got to that point. I love, love, love the way in which you celebrate such a significant change in women's lives. It's a huge part of who we are and who we are becoming. But I love the fact that the soapbox in particular that you got on quite often was that it's not a negative place. All these narratives that they hit us with about all the terrible things that are going to happen when we hit this point of midlife and go into menopause, you were like, none of that, thank you very much.
Absolutely. I think we are taught, aren't we, that midlife and certainly menopause, which I know we're going to talk about in a moment, it's the beginning of the end. Whereas actually, I see it really as a complete new start. It is a period of transition in a woman's life. It's massively empowering if we choose to embrace it. We are different when we've gone through it, but as we both agree, it brings all sorts of possibilities for women if we choose to go without the flow for a change.
Oh, I like that one. You must have had that one up your sleeve a few times. Well, I think when I came across, when we're both huge fans of Brené Brown, and this idea, that quote that she has about when we hit midlife, and midlife is basically tapping us on the shoulder and saying, use the gifts that you were given. I'm not kidding around any longer, words to that effect. And that really felt true to me, of hitting the midlife. And even before menopause, I'm 52, so I'm definitely in that territory. But coming back before then, this concept to me of midlife, when in my definition, when the needs of your children sort of recede a bit into the background so that the desires of you can step into the foreground. And that to me feels incredibly exciting.
I think it's a real time of reckoning. I think, big birthdays are always a time of reckoning, and 50 is a really big birthday. And I think when we come up to these birthdays, we start to think, okay, so what have I done with my life? Who do I want to be? Where am I going? And I think 50, you cannot pretend anymore that you've got lots more time left than you had before. You've hopefully still got a lot, but you can't really pretend you're not in midlife at 50, I reckon, unless you're planning definitely to live beyond 100. So that starts you thinking, okay, what do I want to do with the rest of my one precious life? What am I going to do with it? I don't want to waste any more time if I've been wasting time. And as you say, you want to, I think, have more of an impact on the world, and you want to have more of a sense of fulfillment. And often, as you talk about, wanting to contribute as well. So it's that time of reckoning, I think, when everything is thrown up in the air and we have to sort of work out what's next.
And that is the big question, isn't it? It's the what's next. And to me, it's the recognition, the understanding, which I have with so many women that I speak with, is that we get to choose this to be a new beginning for us, not yes, I've only got X amount of time left and it's too late to start this, or it's too late to try that. On the contrary, I actually had this realization just last week. My daughter's just turned 18, so she's in her first year of university. My son's finished uni. And suddenly my diary has opened up. I was the taxi driver for so long. I was the shepherd of the wee flock for so long. And suddenly there is time that's available. And I think it can be easy for us to sort of lose track of who we are underneath the labels and almost like the wee jobs that we've had, if we've had kids. And now there's this opportunity to discover a new version of ourselves. But do you feel that sometimes we can get lost when we are looking at who we want to become or who we have been?
Oh my goodness, we can absolutely get lost. And I got very, very lost for quite a long time. And it takes some real soul searching, I think, to find yourself. As I said, we really
Mm.
are different when we go through midlife and through menopause. Our hormonal profile is different. It's supposed to be different. But trying to work that out is very tricky, because society has told us, and we've learned all these lessons for years, that we're supposed to be something. And then, as you said, we get to midlife and all of those things are potentially stripped away, and we are left with who we are. And perhaps we're even sometimes closer to our prepubescent selves, because we've gone through menopause and we don't have so much estrogen coursing through our veins anymore. So we can start to think, okay, well, what are we supposed to do now? But also, where is our value? I think that is a
Mm.
key thing in midlife, because so much of a woman's value from this perspective of society is wrapped up in her ability to reproduce, whether or not we reproduce. So, that's the main thing that we're known for. That's our main difference from men, is that we reproduce. So when that is taken away from us, and when we don't have any knowledge about it, because it's still such a taboo subject, we are lost. We really, so many women
Mm.
describe feeling lost. They just don't know who they are anymore.
So it's almost like, as we were talking before we hit record, we look at our past and what's led us to here. And then what are our options going forward from here? And society and conditioning, if we fall prey to that, has chopped off a lot of the options, because we've all heard that expression that, oh, I've started to become invisible. People don't notice me any longer. But I think in my opinion and my very limited, personal experience, we can choose to let that happen, or we can actually see it as, oh, it's like freedom to an extent. It feels like freedom to me. This idea that I don't have to prove myself in terms of how attractive I am, or how I'll get a response from an audience because of my physical appearance any longer. That sort of stuff is no longer as relevant. It's more about how I want to be for me, and that to me feels like a bit of a definition of freedom. What do you reckon about that?
I think it certainly is the case. And I think there is a freedom that we don't need to conform to society's strictures anymore. But at the same time, when it comes to invisibility, I think we can tend to bring that on as well, because we can shrink.
Mm.
I see women in midlife, because they don't know who they are anymore, because they don't conform to their notion of what society values. We shrink back. And what's really important is that we don't shrink back, is that we step forward. So, you'll often see me in red. And nobody is going to call me invisible when I'm wearing red. Now, I'm not suggesting that everybody wears red, but it's about the posture that we take as well. Because if we take up space, it's very difficult to ignore us. Whereas if we shrink back because we think that's what we're supposed to do, then we will be overlooked. But if we
Mm.
make our voices heard, we won't. Does that make sense?
It does, especially when you consider what you were mentioning previously, which is that desire that we get for contribution, for fulfillment. I think it's got something to do around the word significance and legacy. Have you heard of the book Bronnie Ware's Top Regrets of the Dying? Is that a
No,
book
I
that you've come
haven't.
across?
But
So
no, I haven't.
it's an Australian author who, a woman who did a lot of work in palliative care. And so
Mm-hmm.
she had a lot of conversations with people who were coming to the end of their life. And what were the things when they looked back? There was lots of good stuff. It's not a sad story in that respect. There was lots and lots of great memories, but she saw that the most common things that people felt regret about, one of them was not taking more chances, doing more of the things that called them, standing for something in that sort of area. So like dampening down the things that we really wanted to do, but for some reason, didn't think we should, or perhaps were discouraged from. And I think this is the jumping off point. It's like the division point, that we could choose to go down the path of least resistance and just getting smaller and more invisible and all those sort of things, or we can decide, no, this is the thing that I want to do, and I'm going to stand out in my own way. And I'm a business mentor. I don't necessarily say that this has to be in a business sense, but there needs to be a tying to purpose in some way. I've just been studying in the Neuroscience Academy over here in Australia, and one of the health science pieces is that it's shown, without doubt, we age better physically, emotionally, spiritually, in every way, if we are aligned to our own sense of purpose and something that's really important to us. So do you feel that there is that opportunity to reignite or ignite that sense when we hit midlife and menopause?
Absolutely. And I think this is the perfect moment for my whale story. Can I tell you my whale story?
Yes, please.
Okay, so there are two creatures, two entities that go through menopause in the world, and those are human females and whales. And when whales go through menopause, at about the age of 50, like we do, when they go through menopause, they become the leaders of their pods. They don't shrink into invisibility. They lead their pods, sometimes 2-3 pods. So they become the absolute matriarch. And I learned about this from a woman called Darcy Steinke, who has written a book called Flash Count Diary. And I've had her on my podcast. And she made me cry because she went out into the ocean and she actually found this whale that she'd become obsessed with. And this whale was known as J2, otherwise known as Granny. And she had an experience where she met this whale, because they can tell from the dorsal fin which whale is which. So she knew she'd encountered Granny. And she credited meeting this matriarchal whale with transforming her whole experience of menopause, not just her emotional response, but her physical symptoms as well. So that's mind over matter. There you go. For having that sense of purpose, can affect how we age. It's so important. So I reckon that you can apply this sort of evolutionary theory to women, that there is a reason why we go through menopause. And I think, like whales, we are far more valuable to our communities as leaders than as breeders.
Oh, that's a tweetable, as they would say. I actually isn't that
a brilliant story, isn't it?
Oh,
I just love it.
I can see Granny the whale in my mind's eye right now. And it made me, I cannot remember, and I won't get this right, but there was a quote that I read that resonated down to my tippy toes when I read it about menopause. And it was that prior to menopause, all our energy went to the womb. Okay, that was like the centerpiece of femininity. After menopause, all of that energy goes to our heart. And I went, oh, hell yeah. I loved that as an idea, that, all that passion that we've got to people, places, and things, and purpose now. Like, what is it that excites you? What is it? What is tapping you on the shoulder? This to me is the essence of a next chapter. And good God, if menopause is not a next chapter, then I don't know what is.
Well, when we're done making babies, we're ready to make solutions. That's what I reckon.
You're coming up with all of these. I'm going to have to write
I've
them all down.
I know.
But let's just go back a moment, because we're going to keep talking about this particular subject, because this whole podcast series that you're a lovely guest on is about change. There's been all sorts of topics that we've been covering, and change, as in the change, is naturally one of the key topics there. But I'm interested in knowing what brought you to this point. Obviously, you are out there at the moment through Magnificent Midlife to really change and challenge and change the negative narrative and stereotypes around what menopause means. But I'd love to know the previous chapters, or for you to just share briefly, how did you come to this point? Because I've always found that the previous chapters sometimes are completely different to the ones that we're in now. And sometimes you can look back with hindsight and draw very simple steps between them and see how they came together. So give us the backstory, dear Rachel.
Oh, goodness. How far back do you want to go? Goodness. Well, yeah, I had a very, very different life. And in a circuitous way, it did lead me to here. So I lived a very, very stressful life. I was a consultant with a financial communications agency in the city of London. I worked all over the world. I worked in New York, in Times Square, and I was advising companies on, the communications around going public on the stock exchange, and it was pretty intense. And eventually I moved from agency to going in-house because I thought that might be easier. I was a mum and, I didn't want to be working all these silly hours that you have to do in an agency. And it was even worse. So I'd lasted about a year there. And then I thought, sod this, I really don't want to be living like this anymore. So I decided to go freelance. I'd met a lovely new man in my life and he had his own business. I was inspired by that. I thought, oh, this looks exciting. I'll go freelance. But I didn't really know what I was doing. So I tried to do what I'd been doing, but do it freelance instead of for somebody. And that worked for a few years. But what happened was, as soon as I stepped off that roller coaster, in the same way that when you go on holiday and you stop for a bit and then you get sick, I had a diagnosis of early menopause, and that happened at 41. And the reason I found out was because with this lovely man I'd met, I wanted to have another child. I'd had one, I have one son. I'd always wanted another one from the minute he was born. So we were trying to have another child. And before we sort of went gung-ho on that one, we thought, I better have a hormone test, had a hormone test. And the doctor said, well, Rachel, you have the profile of a postmenopausal woman.
Wow, that must have been such a shock.
What? It was an amazing shock. I mean, it was just an incredible shock. And the bottom fell out of my world, really, because that had always been my dream, to have the other child. And that dream just went away, just evaporated. But also what happened was, and what caused me the most difficulty, was that I had bought into all these negative ageist stereotypes about what it meant to be a menopausal woman. I thought at 41, I can't be menopausal. What are you talking about? That's for older women. That's for really older women. So I thought, what's going on? So I learned, and I did a lot of research, and I found out all sorts of things. But I realized eventually that I was being really ageist against myself. Because at 41, even if that was 10 years early to be going through the final bit of menopause, it actually wasn't early to be going into perimenopause, which is the period when our hormones can start to fluctuate before the final moment of menopause, which is average time of 51. And I realized I just got subsumed by all of this negativity about who I was. And I thought I didn't have any value. I thought this was the end of meaningful life. I'd always dismissed older women, I'm ashamed to say now. And I didn't know who I was. So I floundered for quite a long time. Of course, I had nobody else to talk to because I was 10 years earlier than most women. I did manage to get support from something called the Daisy Network, which I would really recommend if anybody else is going through early menopause. But things also changed because I went to see a nutritionist, and this was a really, really weird thing. I went to see a nutritionist and she put me on a special diet. She said, take out caffeine, alcohol, sugar, eat really regularly so you balance your blood sugar levels. And I got my periods back. So I went from definitively you are postmenopausal to having a bleed. And as time went on, I discovered that this wasn't that abnormal. It didn't last that long. It lasted for about 9 months. And then my body went back to being postmenopausal. So it was a bit of a roller coaster ride. There was a lot going on. But eventually, I realized I didn't want other women to be as confused as I was. And I didn't want them to go into all of that negative thinking. I really wanted to provide resources and information to enable them to be prepared, not scared, because we are scared about menopause. We don't understand it. And I didn't want other women to suffer like I did from that lack of knowledge and the nature, it being taboo, really. So that is a bit of a long version of my journey to where I am now, and why I have created this magnificent midlife world, because I want to change women's perceptions of midlife, menopause, but also be resourced to be able to flourish through it and not just suffer through it.
And that idea that it is possible to flourish, not to suffer, because I think those stereotypes, they're almost handed down. I mean, perhaps we've got some listeners who are really fortunate and they've been positively exposed to the concept of menopause, and that it's nothing to hide away and we don't lose our value. My mum never said a word. Never ever said a word. My older sister has not really talked about, like, it just didn't get talked about. So it was this big secret. And I'm not in full menopause yet, because I believe that's 12 months without a period. So
that's right. If you're over 50, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm still, it just came back again the other day, and I'm like, hello, I thought you'd gone. It's like, no, I'm back again. But the hot flashes, the absent-mindedness, I mean, some of the things that definitely happen, I do not hide any of that. My family know what's going on. I'm reading as much as I can. To me, it's a part of life, but it's a part of life that has been kept under wraps. And so a place like your particular membership site, your community, your commitment to resourcing so that people can get their questions answered, and just as importantly, so they can talk to other women as well. It's interesting. In my head, it's sort of like this seesaw. We want to make it a big deal, but not a big deal. Like, I want to know about it. I want to be well informed and resourced, but I don't want to make a huge song and dance about it. I mean, what's that about? What am I trying to balance in my head there, do you reckon?
Well, you see, my ideal world is where we will have menopause parties. We will actually celebrate this. We will think, okay, now I can be a whale. Now I can go out and lead the world. I am not putting all of my focus on my family or my children. You see, this is the thing. I'm, as you know, I'm quite radical about this, and I love getting up on my soapbox. But I think of estrogen as the biddable hormone. Women are taught that estrogen is the be all and end all, and it is what makes us women. But we went through our lives before puberty without estrogen, and we were pretty cool back then. We weren't insignificant. We didn't suddenly become the only version of ourselves that's important when we went through puberty. So in fact, if you think about me, so I went through puberty at 11, and then I went through early menopause at 41. And hopefully I'm going to live to at least 85, 90, maybe 100. I will have a massive part of my life where I do not have the ability to give birth. But that doesn't make me any less. That's just a different stage of my life. And this is where there was a book that was written in 1966 called Feminine Forever. And I think it started this awful notion that without estrogen, women are in some way less. We are in no way less with less estrogen, because we don't lose all of our estrogen. We still have an awful lot that the body creates. The body has a plan for us post-menopause. But anyway, this book, it was written with the sole purpose of promoting hormone therapy. And surprise, surprise, it was financed by the drug companies who made the hormone therapy. And his argument was that we became castrates without estrogen, that we were no longer attractive, boobs would sag, we would not look after our husbands as well as we should do. So it was completely misogynistic. It was totally based in patriarchy. And it was all about, us remaining feminine forever for the sake of our menfolk. So I think that has an awful lot of residual influence on how we see women progressing through life, how we see women as we go through menopause, as our profile changes. But let's get away from that biddable hormone, because I believe once the estrogen is less in our bodies, we're on more of a par with men. And that's why we can step forward. We can take back our power. We can think, what do I want now in this life, rather than how many other people have I got to look after first?
One of the things that comes up as I'm hearing us talk about this is part of my business is the Center for Self-Worth. And I get on my soapbox about how important it is to be anchored in self-worth so that we can become the women we've always been meant to be. It's not just for women, it's for men as well. But a part of the thing that disconnects us from self-worth is conditioning. Very much conditioning. It's like the world, it's like a fish in water. You're not even aware you're in the water because you're surrounded by it. The conditioning that seems to be such a huge part of our society is, as we were talking about before, that we worship youth, and that is everywhere you look. That is what is in our faces. And I know one of the things that I get really cranky about is I pick up a magazine that is for my age group, and I look at the advertisements in there for, like, what is it, anti-aging creams and all that sort of stuff, and it looks like a 25-year-old who's actually in the airbrushed ad. And so part of, if I had a soapbox, it would be for reality and advertising. I think that's possibly part of the reason why we can feel potentially invisible, because we're not visible in the media. How do you think we could do something about that?
I think that's a massive part of it, because it's like children don't see race until you point it out to them.
Yeah.
And I think if we went through life thinking that wrinkles were beautiful and grey hair on a woman was as attractive as grey hair on a man, then we wouldn't fear this aging process as we do. But as you said, we are fed this information from such a young age, and those anti-aging products literally being flogged to. They're not just being flogged by, they're being flogged to women in their 20s, women in their teens. Us young girls are using anti-aging products and using Botox and using fillers and all of this stuff. And it's obscene, actually. It really is obscene, because if we could just rethink the way we view women at all ages, then, as you say, yes, we do not become invisible. And sometimes we contribute to us being invisible because we dye our hair, because we have the Botox, because we have the fillers. And I don't want to judge anybody that wants to do that, but we are not actually showing up as we are. And therefore, society doesn't see us as we are. Does that make sense? Because we're hiding it ourselves because we've bought into those things. So I think the more we can try and show up as we are, the more we can actually fight it. So when we see, you've got a grey-haired television presenter and his co-host is 20 or 30 years younger than him, then write to the TV station, say, this is unacceptable, this is ridiculous. When a Hollywood actor has their partner is also 20 years younger than them. There was, I don't know who it was recently, there was a film where there was an actor the man was 80 and the woman still had to be in her 60s. She couldn't be there still had to be the 20-year age gap, even when we're in, age 80. It just is bonkers, isn't it? But I think
it's frustrating.
we have to take a stand, and we have to keep taking a stand, and say, no, we're not having this.
So taking that external stand is really important. So having our voice be heard in that respect is important. And I think there's also the flip side to this, which is taking the stand for ourselves. And I think this is where self-compassion needs to play a big part, because we are continually bombarded by how we used to be, or that's what's valued, and now we are different. We're at a different stage of life, and we need to be kind to ourselves, because I know I'm getting much better at it. I've been doing the work for quite a few years now, but the greeting myself kindly, because that voice did not used to be kind, and I'm getting kinder to myself by utilizing self-compassion, because it can be hard. It can be hard to see yourself changing and aging and all that type of thing when what we're held up against is so different. So do you think self-compassion has an important role to play as we move forward into our older years?
I think it's absolutely massive, yeah. And also sort of that self-compassion and acceptance. I like to think that beauty is ageless. One of the most beautiful women I've ever met in my entire life happened to be 99 years of age, Tao Porchon Lynch, who sadly died when she was 101. She was a yoga teacher, and I'd been a fan for years, and I actually met her in person when she was 99, and the beauty that radiated out from her was just spectacular. And you know, her face was covered in wrinkles, but to me that was beauty, that was real beauty. So and I think I've earned my wrinkles, you know, that they are marks of my life. You know, I talk about sunspots being signs that we've lived in we've had sunshine. You know, how lovely is that? Laughter lines, literally, it's we've laughed a lot. They're the signs of how we've lived our lives. So I think if we can embrace those ideas as well, that, you know, we're not, oh, that's what I say. Yes. So I say we don't dismiss the autumn leaves in favor of the spring blossom. Both are beautiful. They are just different. One is an evolved form of beauty from the other, you know, and I would like us to approach women and age in the same way, because I believe women of all ages are beautiful. It's just different. But because we've got this norm that youth is beauty, which is a complete load of rubbish, we'll just chuck that one out. And I think also we can change our thoughts, as you know, we can be, just because we think something doesn't make it true. So just because we look in the mirror and we think that we are somehow less than we were before, that doesn't make it true. And in fact, we can turn around our thoughts. We can look at ourselves in the mirror and say, I love you. You look fabulous.
Yeah, that one, that's the one that I work on a lot. That's the one that I work on a lot. And it does really help. It definitely helps. Well, I adored that quote about the autumn leaves, because I enjoy being an autumn leaf. So if we are coming full circle here, it feels, if I pick the pieces out, that what we've been talking about. Now, this is not like a recipe, but I think these are the pieces that we need to be conscious of. I mean, number one, we're going to meander a little, as you've shared, in terms of, I think you used the word floundering, but meandering,
Yes,
floundering, you know,
I did
when we're
flounder.
moving when we're moving around trying to work out, you know, what was and what will be. And that's okay. To me, that's like evolution. Right, next
Yeah.
chapters are often built on skinned knees. Like, that was your experience. You had an experience and you didn't want other people to find it as difficult as you did. So making that decision that I will make resources and insight and encouragement and community and all the things that I needed, and I could not find them. So that's the whole idea of a next chapter being built on skin knees. So you can shorten and sweeten the journey for someone else. So that's the second point, the purpose. So meandering is okay, but let's anchor ourselves in purpose. Let's find something that really grabs our heart, because all that energy is moved from the womb up into the heart now. We want to be a whale. So looking for that thing or those things that excite you. And that there isn't a recipe for that. That's what, just use your curiosity. What draws you forward? The idea of embracing, number three, embracing the freedom that's here for us now. Like, the shackles are off. There is so much of life that is still available. As you said, you're going to be living for another 30, 40 years. So we are certainly not going to sit on the shelf and fall apart in that time. I think another one, we talked about self-acceptance, but we also need to be aware of the physical well-being of ourselves. So it's eating well, it's sleeping well, it's other things there that take care of us physically. Do you think there's anything else that should be on this list for us to look at, to embrace, to take better care of as we are moving into this next chapter of menopause?
I think the final one that you mentioned is absolutely key. It's our physical and our mental health. So I have no doubt that my diagnosis of early menopause was because of the stressful life I had lived. And there is, I do believe that midlife is actually a time when the chickens come home to roost. How we've lived in the past can dictate our experience of midlife and certainly of menopause. There's a woman over here, Meg Matthews, who is very honest about having been both a drug and alcohol addict. And I don't know if you know, but there's a list of 34 scary symptoms of menopause. There's at least 34. But she found out that she'd had every single one of these symptoms, but she was in an AA meeting when she found that out. So I do think that if we haven't looked after ourselves in the past, if we've tried to do everything, if we've tried to burn the candle at both ends all the time, we haven't nurtured ourselves, we can get into trouble in midlife. So a midlife refuel is really what we need. We do, and we can make up for lost time in midlife. So if we start to focus in on our health, on what we're eating, our diet was what changed my menopause diagnosis, and getting our blood sugar levels balanced is absolutely key to our hormonal balance. Basically what happens post-menopause is that the body has a plan for production of menopause, but it moves from the ovaries to the adrenal glands. And if we are stressed, whether that be emotional stress or because our body believes we're under stress because our blood sugar levels are not balanced, then the adrenal glands will focus on producing the stress hormones instead of the estrogen, which it's supposed to produce for us. So managing stress becomes even more important in midlife than it was before. So I think, focusing in on our physical health and mental health, which it's all one health really, but it's massively important. And taking the time to do that will set us up well for a magnificent next chapter. It really will. It will be the backbone of that.
It will. And I'd love to close on that piece there about taking the time. I think one of the things, and I think and feel and know from my own lived experience, that one of the things that is possible now is more time. And this time that becomes available to us. I'm not saying that we're all retired and sitting around. We've all got responsibilities and the need to make a living and all those things. However, there is more time that becomes available for us. We're used to, in so many ways, we're used to investing that time in others. And I think there is a magnificent, if I may take that word, opportunity for a refocus here, and to make sure that the time that becomes available stays, a big chunk of that stays with us. And it isn't automatically, put into the grandkids or taking care of our own parents. That's important, but we've got to keep some for us as well. Would you agree?
Absolutely. It's so important, because otherwise we'll get stressed and we'll get sick, and if we are sick, we can't look after anybody. So we have to invest in our health. We have to, it's such a cliche, isn't it? But we have to put our own mask on before we put the other people's masks on, like on the airplane.
Well, that's why it's a cliche, because it's true. It just stays along. But now we need to be more aware of it than ever. Well, I love the idea of having a magnificent midlife. I love the idea of embracing and flourishing and becoming a whale. And, all that idea of the fact that suddenly this energy that was in the womb is now in the heart and can be put out there into the world in a very different way. So I really appreciate you giving us that background of your own experience and the wisdom of the things that become more important. So where do we go to find you? Give us a little bit of it. Where's the best place in the online world to come and hang out with Rachel?
Well, I am Magnificent Midlife pretty much everywhere. So on all the socials, Magnificent Midlife, magnificentmidlife.com, the Magnificent Midlife podcast, where I interview most amazing women, although amazing and also regular women doing wonderful things in their second half. They're all very inspiring. So that's where you can find me.
Fantastic. And I hear there might be a book fairly soon.
Yes. Oh, yes, I forgot about that. Yes, hopefully.
And what might the title of that one be?
Well, oh gosh, now you're really holding my feet to the fire, aren't you? Okay,
I am, my friend.
It's Making Midlife Magnificent, Transform Your Middle Years, Menopause and Beyond.
Beautiful. Well, I'll make sure that when this episode goes up, if anyone chooses to visit my website, angelarasmus.com, you'll find all the links there in Rachel's episode. Thank you so much, my darling. I knew this would be a wonderful, full-bodied conversation, and that's exactly what it has been. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, it's been an absolute delight. Thank you.
You're welcome. And you, my lovely listener, are you in the midst of what can be transformed into a magnificent midlife? Perhaps it's already magnificent, and what you've heard here today is simply a confirmation that things are opening up for you. But perhaps you might be at that stage where menopause doesn't have those positive connotations for you. And perhaps you do find yourself falling into that thrall, that idea that, the best of life is over and that you don't have the same value that you used to offer to the world. Well, Rachel and I both want you to hear that is crap. Let's call a spade a spade. There is so much more that you can choose to contribute to the world. When I was saying at the end of our conversation just before about making sure that you take some of that time for you, go back inside and find out, what are the things that I want to explore? What am I curious about? What does this next chapter make possible for me? And then Dom will go out there and do them, because I have this feeling that your next chapter might just be magnificent. So thanks so much for listening into this episode. And until next time, take very good care.